Right, hello again. Time for another Canadian. And this particular one, there's a good chance you would have heard of this. This is a fairly big brand, and you probably would have heard of the company, although they're no longer around before. This is Seagram's VO, and this is a miniature that I purchased from Total Wine & More. I think this is one of the ones that I bought rather than them donating it to me. You're looking at 99 cents for this miniature. It is a plastic one, and for a 75 cl you're looking at $14 they were selling it for, Total Wine in Orlando. This is what the full-size bottle looks like. The Whisky Exchange have got it listed at £26, which feels a little bit steep. So Seagram's you may well have heard of. Up to the turn of the Millennium was a very, very big drinks company indeed. Now there was a distillery that was founded in Waterloo, Ontario, which is there, in 1857. Now I don't know what the name of this distillery was, but by 1883 it had been partnered and then fully acquired by a guy called Joseph E. Seagram. Now he died in 1919 and the distillery was taken over by his son. But in 1928, the business was purchased by a group of brothers, the head of which was a guy called Samuel Bronfman. And they had a company already that was called the Distillers Corporation Limited. Now this was actually a derivation of the Distillers Company Limited, which we've encountered quite a few times doing our Scotch whiskies. The Bronfman brothers were actually doing business with DCL in the UK, and they set up their own business in America and Canada called Distillers Corporation Limited. Now they bought the Seagram's distillery in 1928 and actually took the Seagram's name as a brand name and called the company that. I think at the time it's because DCL in the UK were actually becoming quite powerful, and these guys the Bronfman brothers wanted to essentially separate themselves and not be associated with them anymore. So Seagram's became the name of the company, and they were very well prepared for the end of Prohibition. They had quite a lot of stock themselves already kind of sitting around waiting for Prohibition to stop. In 1933 they were able to flood the market. Seagram's VO was one of their bigger brands. Now Seagram's VO was created by Joseph himself in 1919 to celebrate his son's wedding. Now there's actually some dispute as to what VO means. There is no official reasoning as to what VO means. It's either very old, although the whiskies in here are supposedly 6 years old or older, or it's Seagram's very own, as in this is Joseph Seagram's very own whiskey that he made for himself and his family. But nothing official as to what VO means. In terms of like brandy, I think it's very old, because VSOP is very special old pale, I think. So they, post-Prohibition, loads of stock, really got into the market, started growing. 50s and 60s, they were absolutely huge. And the Bronfman family, Seagram's became intertwined with the Bronfman family, and at the time they were known. They were a big family, big company, and the Bronfmans started to expand. They were getting into acquisition of companies. In 1995, one of the brothers actually, the family, was into films and TV and ended up starting a Seagram's entertainment division and had bought some media companies. And all this expansion and growth and crazy decisions and going off in different directions was eventually their downfall. By 2000, their entertainment division had been sold off. And the drinks part of the business was split between Pernod Ricard and Diageo, because they just couldn't survive. And some of the descendants of the Bronfman family have basically been quoted in recent years as saying, look, the decisions that were made were terrible and they just killed the company, and it was an absolute disaster. It was a shame, but it was an absolute disaster. So Seagram's VO is now owned by Diageo. And Diageo have a distillery, I can't remember the name of the town, but it's somewhere near Quebec. They have a distillery, and this is where they're making Seagram's VO. So in terms of the makeup of it, again, don't know. It is a Canadian blended whiskey. Yeah, although according to this, Seagram's VO Canadian whiskey a blend. Okay, that's weird. It's also quite boldly stated Canada's finest on the bottle. Now, I've done Gibson's finest, and I have a feeling that Gibson's Finest is probably a bit finer than this, but we shall see. We'll give it a chance. So in terms of the makeup of this, I've no idea. Now, as I've explained before, Canadian whisky is, the regulations of Canadian whisky is a lot looser than Scotch and American. American's probably the most stringent in terms of you can't add additives, aging, all this lot, for particularly Kentucky bourbon and bourbon generally, and straight bourbon and all this lot. Scotch, you can add colouring to it, but to be single malt, it's got to be malt from a single distillery. With Canadian whisky, you can add additives. So I think you can put colouring in, but essentially 91% of a Canadian whisky has to be Canadian whisky, and then the other 9%, or it's actually 9.09%, can essentially be whatever you want. Now, rumour has it, I have read in one place, that Seagram's VO, when it was owned by Seagram's, they also owned Four Roses, the bourbon, and Four Roses was part of this mix. Now, I always keep referring back to the Alberta dark batch rye, because they made no bones about it. They weren't trying to hide what was in it. They said this is 91% Canadian whisky, Canadian rye whisky. There was 8% of the bourbon, which I can't remember. Damn it, which bourbon was it? It was a bourbon, and then there was 1% which was sherry from the same company that made Harvey's Bristol Cream. So this does happen. It's commonplace apparently in Canada, but a lot of them won't tell you, because putting Canadian whisky plus bourbon plus sherry doesn't sound as good as Canadian whisky. Now, Four Roses now was owned by Diageo, not anymore, is owned by the Kirin Brewery. So it's unlikely that it's Four Roses. Diageo do own do own Bulleit bourbon and George Dickel Tennessee whiskey. Now, Bulleit and George Dickel were made by different companies, particularly like George Dickel Rye was made by MGP and things like that, and Bulleit was made by MGP. Now it's not. Now Diageo have their own distillery in Kentucky, so it's entirely possible that there is some of that in there. Who knows? Who the hell knows? When it's $14 for a bottle, you've got to wonder, particularly with Canadian whisky, how much of it is all Canadian whisky. Anyway, I'm not particularly selling this, it has to be said, because I'll be honest, I'm not overly convinced myself. The more I found out about Canadian whisky, it's been a combination of being interesting and also slightly, not disappointing, but a little bit concerning, just because of the fact that there is Canadian whisky seems to be a lot more fast and loose. And there has been a couple of crackers. Lot 40, brilliant. Gibson's Finest, really impressed with that. Gooder and Worts was fantastic, although I did find out that was actually the old bottling, the original bottling from 1998, not the new version. I'm hoping the new version is as good, because that was fantastic. So there is a couple of crackers, but Canadian Club, not great. Canadian Mist, not brilliant. Crown Royal, not brilliant. Not great. The standard version, not fantastic. So this, I'm bracketing this in the same pack as Canadian Club and that lot, and it's cheap mass-produced Canadian whisky that doesn't seem to be as good as cheap mass-produced American and some cheap mass-produced Scotch, but we'll see. It is quite a bright colour, so it would suggest to me that there has been some kind of coloration added to that, some kind of additive to make it that colour. It's not a great deal on the nose either. It's not overly spirity. It is 40%. Yes, it is 40%. It's not nothing really. A little bit of sweetness, a little bit of rye, a little bit of toffee, but it's minute amounts, to be perfectly honest. There's a bit of flavour in there, but not a lot. What I've found is that the lower end of bourbon and American whiskey it's thin, but it's drinkable. Lower end of Scotch seems to be either really not very good or pretty decent for the money. Lower end Canadian isn't made to be drunk neat. It's not made to be drunk neat at all. It's made for mixers. Whereas I think blends, Scotch blends and cheap American whiskies. A chunk of cheap American whiskies are made to be mixed, but I think there is also a set of cheap American whiskies that are made to be drunk neat, that are not necessarily trying to compete with bourbon, but are saying, look, this is a cheaper version of the good stuff, as it were, but this is what you can drink neat at a budget. All the cheap Canadian whiskies I've had so far, and these have been the big brands, this is Crown Royal, Seagram's VO, Canadian Club, they're clearly made to be mixed because there is nothing in them to encourage you to drink them neat. There is barely any flavour in that at all. There is just enough that it will cut through Coca-Cola or soda water or lemonade or ginger ale or whatever you want to drink it with. But it's clearly not made to be drunk neat because there's nothing there. There's no balance because there's nothing to balance. There really is nothing. There's a slight heat. It doesn't even taste 40%. It tastes like it's 20%. I think it was the macadams I had the other day, where they do a macadams light that, I mean, let's face it, beers, any light version of beer isn't great, so a light version of whiskey you've got to be concerned about. And I think the macadams light was 27%, and that is almost how I can imagine the macadams light taste, because that does not taste 40% at all. There's so little flavour to it, and there's a little bit of like a slightly artificial fudgy character that sort of knocks down any alcoholic burn that's there as well. There's just nothing to it. There is bugger all. There's nothing. VO, I can't even come up with some kind of pun like very, very ordinary. There you go, VO, very ordinary. Very, very ordinary. Because there's nothing in it at all. Not a disappointment, because that's sort of what I was expecting. When you're looking at £14 a bottle, when you've got a miniature that's in plastic, it's never really a good sign. And you hope that it's going to be better than you think, and that it's not worse than I thought it was going to be. That's pretty much exactly what I thought it was going to be. Not even thin, because that would imply there's something to be thin. There's just a slight fudginess. There's a bit of a mouthfeel to it. There's not even much of a kick of a 40% alcohol. There's just very little, and it feels like it would barely kick through in a cocktail as well. Disappointing. And I actually have a box, because I used to work for a company called Oddbins, that when I started working for Oddbins, they were actually owned by Seagrams, the chain. I think it was 1999, I think, or something like that. And every member of staff received a big wooden box. It was about yay big, with 3-litre bottles in. And one of them was a Seagrams VO. I can't remember what it was. There was a Seagrams VO, there was a Martell Cordon Bleu, because they owned Martell. And I cannot for the life of me remember what the other one was. And I've still got it. Never touched it, never opened it. It had like a print of something celebrating Seagrams. It might have been it was some kind of anniversary. Maybe it was because what was it, 83, 1990, I don't know, I can't remember what it was. It was some kind of anniversary box, and everybody that worked for Oddbins as a full-timer got this box, and loads of people were like, free brews, brilliant, necking it and everything like that. And I've kept it, it's sat in the loft. I don't know whether it's worth anything, but as a collector's piece it probably is, because obviously, you know, the Seagrams is long gone, Martell Cordon Bleu is gone as well, but after having that, I've got no intention of opening that litre bottle of VO at all. Right, 2 more Canadians to go, but the next 2 do sound like they're going to be interesting, so stay tuned for that, and I'll see you at the next one. Cheers.